Postman Pat and the spring cleaning day. It was spring in Greendale, and everyone was busy. It was awful. "I'll be glad when it's all done," said Pat. Pat went into the darkness and crashed into a tree on his bike. "What was that?" shouted Pat.
"See what a mess you've made." "I've seen worse," said Mrs. Thompson, smiling.
"It looks dangerous to me," Pat shouted.
"Oh, it's all right, really. You'd best be on your way with all those letters," said Mrs. Thompson.
But he looked cross, very cross. "I might do that," said Pat. "I might well." But he soon felt better. Pat was on his way. He looked very dusty. Said Pat. The next day, Pat called on Miss Hubbard with a parcel, and she said,
"Not yet. Now stop pestering me and get off."
The door closed. Whoosh! "Nuts," said Pat. It was no good. Pat was on his way with the letters. And that's what happened. Oh, rain again. Pat put on his wellies. Splash, splash, splash. There was a lot of rain and there was a lot of mud. He had mud on his pants, mud on his shirt, and mud all over his face. Pat saw Sam. "Hello, Sam." Sam said, "What have you been doing?" "Where are you?" said Pat. Pat was on his way. He had a letter for Granny Dryden. He went to her house. "Hello, Mrs. Dryden. There is a letter for you today." Granny Dryden said, "Lovely, I like letters." She opened the letter, read it quickly, then looked out of the window. A large bird flew down and pecked at the letter. Oh, the shoo! "Go away, shoo!" cried Pat, flapping his arms. Said the bird. "Now look at it." They put it by the fire to dry. Pat said, "Your ducks like the rain. Cheerio." Pat was on his way. Pat called on Ted. He had a parcel for him. "Hang on, it's all muddy," said Ted. "Mend it." "Thanks," said Pat. "No bother," said Ted. He washed all the mud off. "Lovely," said Ted. Pat went on his way, going through quite a few hedges and muddy ditches. He didn't look at all like a postman. Still. Then he had an idea. It was time to go home. The next day was Thursday. When Pat called on Mrs. Pottage, the kitchen was full of bees. "How did they get there?" said Pat. Mrs. Pottage began to laugh.
"There they are," she said. "Would you like a cup of tea, Pat? The kettle's just boiled," said Mrs. Pottage. "There's plenty of hot water."
"Thanks," said Pat. "That would be lovely." "I'll pop in for it when I've delivered my letters," said Pat. Pat went on his way. "I hope she's not poorly," said Pat. On Friday, Pat was on his way with the letters. When Pat arrived at Granny Dryden's cottage, he went and hid behind the sofa. And there was Granny Dryden sitting by the fire, knitting. Pat crept up behind Granny Dryden and called, "Morning! Letters!" "Oh, Pat, oh," said Granny Dryden. "That's funny," said Pat. "You've not forgotten it's Wednesday, have you?" "I've certainly not forgotten," said Granny Dryden. Pat ran to his van. "It's a bit dusty and bent," said Pat. Yes, now they could all hear it. Soon it came slowly up the hill, slowly round the bend, slowly into the square.
Hurrah! Hurrah!
The children cheered. They all got in, and they were off. They went over the hills and down the valley to Pencaster. They went to the toilet on the motorway. They went whoosh. Look, they had a lovely time. They went, no, this is Wales. Katie said,
We're back home.
off they went again. Then they left the motorway. There were more hills and windy roads. They saw kangaroos and a tree full of monkeys, then broke down on the steep hill into Pencaster. Dear me, said Pat. The children said,
Oh!
The next day, Miss Hubbard said,
I have just the thing. She took a yellow silk ribbon from her sewing box. Look,
and who do you think had to help mend the engine?
it'll be all right when it's been to the cleaners.
It was time to go home. Katie and Tom Pottage asked their mother,
Can't we stay longer?
but most of them were asleep on her furry lap before the coach was on the motorway. They'll be safe there, said Pat. Don't move. He ran to the cafe and bought a bag of nuts. He ran back to Miss Hubbard. Pat shook the bag of nuts at Miss Hubbard. Come on, lovely nuts.
Oh, thank you, Pat, said Miss Hubbard.
At last they were there, hidden amongst the trees. Look, there's a Welsh signpost, said Pat. No one could read it. And off they all went. But he was too late. Then they saw it. It was a huge black cat, spitting and showing its claws. Quick, Pat, said Sam. Now! It thinks you're its mum, said Pat.
Bring it in, said Mrs. Pottage.
Thanks. I'll be on my way. The black cat jumped for the wall, slipped and fell in the water trough. Oh, what a splashing and a noise there was.